Can you hear me now? Perfect. You sure about this, Rajiv? All right. Well, first off, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to preach up here today. And if you all listen very closely, you might just be able to hear my mom laughing from about 2,000 miles away. The reason for that is because one morning when I was in college, I was moping around the house wondering what I should do with my life. And my mom says, out of the blue, I can see you becoming a pastor. And I laughed really hard at that suggestion because at the time I was about as far from the church as one could imagine. I was probably wearing some wildly inappropriate heavy metal shirt, very angry. And here I am, now a member of a church, giving a sermon the Sunday after Easter. The irony goes even a bit deeper because in this conversation, I was so certain about what my future was not while having a conversation about my uncertain future. Now, the first time I read the passage of the Great Commission to prepare, I thought about how Jesus' benign message of spreading the gospel would be twisted and perverted into ruthless Christian expansion across the globe and over countless other cultures. Up until even today, when crosses are painted on tanks and bombs. And that would be a completely legitimate understanding, but I just don't think it fits the energy or overall vibe for the Sunday after Easter. That was my first impulse, and it probably says something about how I read things, but I wanted to resist that interpretation and to spend some time digging a bit deeper. So upon repeated readings, one phrase within the passage kept ringing like a chime, demanding more of my attention. And I should say I worked with a different translation of the Bible, an English Standard Version, and the language is different, but they say exactly the same thing. When they saw him, they worshiped him, but some doubted. I think our version's a bit more poetic. I've always had this vision of the disciples as this perfectly faithful collective, just following Jesus around, witnessing miracles. And the Bible is very explicit, this is not the case. But that's just what I feel when I'm reading the Bible. I think to myself, they were there. They were able to see the miracles with their own eyes. They had proof. Now, I'm reminded of a joke I heard a while back when two friends, an atheist and a Christian, are talking, and the atheist tells a story of getting caught in a snowstorm, and he fears for his life. Atheist drops to his knees. You probably all know where this is going, and prays to God for help. Lo and behold, two hikers appear, and the atheist is saved. His Christian friend, of course, says, well, God works in mysterious ways. And the atheist says back, that wasn't God. That was just two hikers passing by. This is important because sometimes what we see isn't true, and what's true isn't necessarily what we see. And in fact, according to Daniel Kahneman, what we believe is really just a matter of the story we prefer telling ourselves. Here we are told some had doubts. Of course some had doubts. They all had doubts that I'm sure range from very pragmatic, our leader was just crucified and we must evangelize in hostile territory, to maybe a weirder doubt that like one disciple has a running theory that Jesus is just a really profound street magician, but they've been following so long, there can't possibly be any turning back now. But how do you possibly explain the Romans botching a crucifixion? That's not what the Romans do. to the rational doubt that somehow this resurrection is actually a miracle too far. And it's verging on something like sorcery. Maybe it's the miracle that exposes everyone to the fact that even with death conquered, fear and doubt still remain. What is doubt? Well, doubt in our everyday shorthand is used for, I do not believe that. We all have that person in our life. They begin telling you a story, and you listen, and you nod, and you say, I doubt that. But doubt is solely uncertainty. Therefore, it's both an intellectual position and an emotional state. And while its definition is quite simple, its potential is extreme. For instance, the Bible I worked with associated the "but some doubted" line with everyone but the main 11 disciples. Why would that be? Well, for whatever reason, the Bible's editing committee thought it best to associate doubt with outsiders, people not in the in-group. Certainly an authoritarian approach, but it does illuminate the fact that doubt arouses very strong feelings, and many people and most power structures have a motivation to crush doubt. They have a vested interest in seeming inevitable and solid and certain, and to think otherwise is an offense. Now, doubt harnessed and systematized, however, is also the source of the scientific method. The so-called Age of Enlightenment was when people finally began to openly doubt the church's first principles. We take this for granted now, but the forward march of progress has always just been that. It's always been a slow slog of a march forward. For instance, did you know in 1840 surgeons didn't wash their hands? Yeah, an Austrian doctor named Semmelweis compared rates of childbed fever in mothers helped by surgeons who would perform autopsies, not wash their hands, and then go deliver babies, to the rates of mothers that had childbed fever helped by midwives who only delivered babies. He was actually ridiculed, and when he died, surgeons still weren't washing their hands. Luckily, today things are a bit different, but the point stands that even learned men of science don't want to be doubted. They have a vested interest. And a lot of mothers suffered needlessly for it. Now, what does this all mean for us as Christians? Well, there is for sure a lot to be doubtful about. What does the passage tell us? Well, Jesus, undeterred, went right ahead and gave his charge. Jesus doesn't even acknowledge the doubt. He just pushes right through it, and he might as well have said, just get back to work. Now, some of you might be familiar with Marshawn Lynch, the beast mode fullback from Seattle, Oakland native, who terrorized my poor Green Bay Packers for years, and he was asked, how do you run the way you do? And his answer is, a lot of people just can't take when you run through their face over and over and over and over and over and over again. Doubt, when coming from a place of fear, is that face we just need to run through. I still get doubts every single time I backpack, and it's something I love to do. What if I twist my knee? What if my car breaks down? I had nothing but doubts writing this sermon. What do I have to say? Run through its face. You're afraid of public speaking. Run through its face. But you told your mother you would never run through its face. When I do that, it seems to quiet down. But when I give in to doubts, that voice gets a lot louder and far more convincing. On the other hand, we as a church should normalize and cultivate doubt in places it seeks to crush it. And this is difficult because it forces us to both admit that our own biases and interests may be problematic, and furthermore, that our perspective is extremely limited in scope or even faulty. Now, for a moment, all right. On the screen is the Mueller-Lyer illusion. I'm sure some of you have come across this before. It's two parallel lines on top of each other, and there's arrows pointing outward from one line, and then there's arrows on the ends that point inward. And this gives you the illusion that the bottom line is longer. Now, I previously mentioned Daniel Kahneman. He's the author of a very profound book called Thinking Fast and Slow, and he uses this illustration for a very relevant point. If you look at it, obviously the two lines at first appear different lengths, but if you measure them, you now know they are in fact the same length. The interesting point, though, is that you cannot, no matter how hard you try, see two same length lines. Your eyes and your brain just react. You still, to some degree, feel that they're different lengths. Now, how does one fix this? Well, you don't. You just have to resist the impulse to believe what your eyes are telling you in this instance. And as a side note, I think this is a shocking metaphor for context. But I want to go back to that scene in the passage for a moment. Those 11 disciples with an unsure future, but definitely not doubting at all, but tasked with a story to tell. Rome's at the apex of its power. Whole cities built of marble. There's vast armies stationed all around the Mediterranean. Rome would have you believe it was always going to be this way, and it had always been this way. And Rome would spend a lot of time crushing doubt, and a lot of good people would needlessly suffer. Yet here we are, 2,000 years apart, telling the story. And the future is still uncertain, but in that doubt lies our hope. Thank you.